Welcome to the Phoenix Prosperity Podcast, where wealth meets legacy. Join your host, Tim Fergestad, as we explore the journeys of Phoenix's finest to success and beyond.
All right. Hello, this is Tim Fergestad. Thank you for joining us. I'm very pleased to have Salman Ahmad with me here today. Salman is the CEO and co-founder of Mosaic, a construction technology company that builds software that makes home building more scalable and efficient. Welcome to the show, Salman.
Thanks so much, Tim. Great to be here.
All right. So why don't you give us a snapshot, everybody listening, a snapshot of what Mosaic is doing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you kind of gave out the kind of elevator pitch, so to speak. Yeah, we're a construction technology company, and what that means is, as a construction company, we focus on building houses, and we actually build houses. We serve as a general contractor, and that's how we make our money. But as a technology company, we build software, and then we use that software to make ourselves better at building homes. And we've been doing this for a couple of years now, and have definitely found a lot of product market fit in the emerging built-to-rent asset class, which is obviously growing rapidly here in Phoenix and many other markets around the country as well.
Okay, can you explain how your technology aspect is different from one of the traditional contractors that are out there?
Totally, yeah. Well, I mean, I think, from a business model perspective, the differences are stark, right? I mean, there's very few construction companies out there that build their own software. And I think what we've been able to do is leverage, the closely tight integration between software that we develop that is tightly woven into our actual operations itself. And so I think that's, the clear differentiator from a general contracting perspective. But as far as the underlying technology is concerned, how is the technology differentiated from, say, some other
software
that a other traditional GC is able to go buy off the shelf?
Sure. And, why is that your secret sauce so important to our listeners?
And I think that the key element that we realized early on with Mosaic is how vitally important it was for us to make the lives of our subcontractors and our trades so much more efficient. And how do we make it easier for them to bid, schedule, and get paid on our jobs? And we found that there was a information problem in a lot of the construction projects, as opposed to a physics problem, right? The issue with a lot of construction was not how do you swing a hammer.
Communication.
It's how do you get people to be in the right place at the right time. And what we decided to do very early on, this was actually motivated by a lot of my graduate school research, which I'm sure we'll talk about in just a second, but was how do we basically pre-program every single trip that every single subcontractor will make on our job site before the project even starts. And that starts to be like a very granular level of data representation. And the outcomes is very powerful, right? You're able to have tremendous visibility, a lot of clarity. It resolves a lot of conflicts between yourself and the subcontract, between you and the owner. But it also comes at a cost. And that cost is that you're now dealing with 30 to 40,000 individual, almost micro contracts that you have to manage.
Oh, wow.
And so that's the potential, that's the downside. And we've been building software to help wrangle and make that data a lot.
Okay. Well, that sounds very powerful, but also incredibly challenging, particularly when you have so many different variables and people in the loop. For our listeners, though, first, for a little more context, maybe you can talk a little bit about how important those sort of holding costs and delays can be to a project.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the challenge.
Perhaps one of the biggest risks in construction, right?
It is absolutely the biggest risk, and it's also so deceptively difficult. It's so easy to think about things with rosy-eyed, with a rosy-eyed view. But you see, the challenge specifically with home building in particular and residential construction is not in the complexity of the construction. And I think that's the thing that throws a lot of people off. They're like, building a home is simple. It's easy. I may have, you may have done it, many of the listeners may have done it dozens of times, maybe even for themselves, right? It's not a complicated construction. And I think that's why it's deceptive. The challenge with, residential construction, and specifically built to rent, is what I like to call concurrency, not complexity. It's not that the units that you're building are complicated. it's actually some of the easiest construction you can do. The challenge is the concurrency, the fact that you have 200 units going active all at the same time. And when you're a contractor building a dozen or so of these projects, you have 200 times a dozen, right, going active at the same
Right.
time. Oftentimes using a lot of the same subcontractors or a mixture of subcontractors across the projects. And that is the challenge. And it's so easy for one small thing to not show up and that causing
Right.
a cascade of delays. And I,
Right.
I I mentioned this, somewhat in a defeatist way when people who are not familiar with real estate or construction or home building say, well, if I were to go on a typical home building site and I were to walk into a given house at any given day, what am I likely to see happening? And the honest answer is
Nothing.
probably nothing is happening on any given day, right? Because that's the challenge with home building. It's not that it takes fast, it's that it's a hurry up and wait. And
Yep.
waiting for that one window to come in so it can be installed
So
before
you can get approval for the next phase.
and
Yep.
so on and so forth, right? So it's a hurry up and wait game, and the delays are costly. And when you're building 200 units across a dozen projects, you can't afford those types of delays. It's a
Right.
huge expense and it's a huge risk factor, as you mentioned.
Okay. So can you give us an example of the logistics? I think of it as the old herding cats analogy when you have so many different trades all trying to coordinate with each other, and that sounds like the real art of being a GC. Can you speak to how traditionally what sort of challenges come up, and then how you're able to navigate those
Totally.
complexities?
Well, I think the difficulties originate even before the project even starts, which is why I liken the way that we think about the underlying construction challenge being what we refer to as a CSP problem, the contracting, scheduling, and then payments. I think those are the three
Okay.
elements. It's oftentimes easy to focus on the scheduling side because that's where the rubber hits the road. That's what people typically think about, where
Right.
it's the framer didn't show up on time or the plumber, is delayed or stuck in traffic or something like that. The reality is that projects that come off the rails 9 months before that point. And it starts with the contracting, right? Very clean scopes of work, very granular elements in terms of when are people, what does the contract say? How's their schedule going to be broken up? If they have to do a particular scope, how many days do they have? And what are the trips that they're going to be making
Right.
out to the job site? And tying that back into them from a payments perspective as well. I think the number one cause of unnecessary stress and relationship challenges is a is a lack of communication and a misalignment of expectation when it comes to payment and payment terms, right?
Okay.
And so being very clear with that up front is very, very
Right.
important as well, not just to keep the trains running on time and keeping productivity up, but to also like you want to enjoy your days and you don't want to have to go into work every single day and have an uphill battle with, payment terms and things like that. And I think that's one of the inspirations that we had is so much of this problem can be resolved if you are able to take the time and energy and go contractor by contractor, break it up into very, very granular, bite-sized pieces that describe the who, what, when, where, and how much of every single task that they have to do that you're asking them to do, and agree on that up front, everything starts to flow from that point onward.
Right.
And I think that's
Okay.
what we've endeavored to do. And it's not an easy task to be clear. And there's still areas that we have to improve, and we are improving on our end. But I think the premise there is
Right.
the more granular visibility and the more objective you can get, the better the
Okay.
outcome
Right.
is.
So I imagine there's some advantages for the bigger groups, right? Lifestyle or Empire, right? When they control more of the subs in-house sort of thing, they don't have quite the coordination hassles that maybe the mid-size or smaller operators do. Can you speak to how your software helps different size people and specifically how it works in Mosaic?
Yeah, well, I think it's more of a function of the size of the project as opposed to the size of the company per se, right?
Okay.
I think the complexity is on a project basis, and there's many different ways in which you can, try to solve that problem, right?
Okay. Well, whether you're building ten townhomes or 100, you still have to coordinate a lot of the same characters.
And I think that's the element, right? Like I think this is the what is it? The holy grail that traditional and new age construction firms are trying to solve, which is the coordination problem, right?
Right.
And different firms take different approaches to it. A lot of and I don't, a lot of maybe more established traditional construction firms may try to control that coordination through vertical integration, right? By owning
Mhm.
or controlling their supply chain so that they're able to direct people in maybe more direct ways than they're able to direct a third-party subcontractor. Some of the more on the other end of the extreme, the modular or, prefab folks feel like, hey, well, we can control the coordination problem if we bring everything into a factory setting, right? And so it's interesting to think about construction and the coordination problem as the holy grail. And you see so many approaches from traditional to, new tech. Companies have raised hundreds of millions of dollars in venture capital. They're actually all chasing the same problem, which is how do you coordinate? And some try to coordinate by owning
Right.
supply chain. Some try to control it by replacing the supply chain altogether. And I think Mosaic is kind of sitting in the middle, right? It's like we want
Okay.
to leverage existing supply chains and have better information tools available to ourselves internally to coordinate that, as well as very soon externally that they're able to use to manage their own work on Mosaic jobs. And so I
Okay.
think that's kind of the way that we like to think
Okay.
about the framing of the space.
Okay, I appreciate that. I mean, I'm a smaller investment firm, right? Oak Street Assets. I like that because we're lean and mean, right? I don't have a lot of overhead, and I can be picky and so forth. I don't have to do a deal unless I want to. Whereas that's maybe I think the space you're in as well a little bit. You're trying to be lean and mean, but still scale because some of these bigger groups, right? They bring people in-house. They bring their own electricians in-house, for example, so they don't have to worry about them being tied up in another job. They make sure they're on their project, but there's a big cost associated with that.
Yeah. And,
And
and
trying to
it's
keep,
it,
go ahead.
it, it's a big cost in the traditional and the existential way, and I'm not passing judgment either, right? Because clearly there's super successful firms that do this very very well, but
Right.
there is a fundamental challenge from a risk perspective, and
Sure.
as I mentioned, the existential. Let me kind of unpack both of those. One of the core I'll call philosophical tenets that Mosaic had is that we wanted to find a way to grow quickly. We had, our investors are primarily Silicon Valley, technology investors. So we definitely had a growth mandate as a company, and we
Okay.
wanted to find ways in which we're able to grow in ways that were CapEx light and minimize third-party behavior change. And the reason for that, in given our profile of business, is that we felt that this was the right trade-off for us to make to achieve our underlying growth ambitions as a company, because those are the two areas that make it very easy to stumble in the construction space, especially when you're trying to do things new. When you're trying to do
Okay.
things new and you require your subcontractors to incorporate that change, you're now at the risk of the weakest link in your chain, right?
Sure. Sure.
And then if you're requiring very high capex heavy ways of growth, that is very challenging in a very cyclical real estate and construction market. And so I think those are two very, core decisions that Mosaic made is how do we grow in a very capex light way to your point of being mean and lean, and
Hmm.
how do we grow in a way that allows us to minimize third party behavior change? Because I think there's this, as I mentioned, this existential risk as well, right? There's obviously a cost for bringing things in house, but there's
Hmm.
also a hidden cost, which is in theory, when folks are out there as a legitimate bona fide third party, they're
Hmm.
gaining experience on your competitors' jobs as well, right?
I
If you're
see.
a GC and you're hiring an electrician that works with a bunch of other GCs, on one hand, that's annoying because when you pick up the phone, they have 15 other bosses that they also have to report,
Right.
right? But on the other hand, they're learning from all those other jobs in ways
Right.
that they would not learn on your job entirely. So it's a fascinating trade-off,
Okay.
analysis in
That's a
that.
good point. Yes. Okay. I like it. So, before we get into the asset class, and let's talk a little bit about the market. You mentioned Silicon Investors. Is that where the software, your origination of the sort of the Mosaic brainchild was born and before you moved to Arizona?
Yeah, totally. I think that the technology background basically came from kind of maybe a story arc of my own life.
Okay.
I my from an academic and professional background, my background is in software engineering and computer science.
Okay.
I did my PhD over at MIT. Before then, my master's at Stanford. Worked at a couple startups along the way. Yeah,
Nice.
exactly.
Right? Nerds unite. Okay.
There
That's
you
all.
go. But I grew up in a construction household. And so a lot of my research at
Okay.
Stanford and later at MIT was really focused on the intersection of what I call physical world software, right? Software that, you know,
Okay.
moves atoms as opposed to just moving bits, that coordinates physical processes as opposed to purely digital processes.
Right.
And, obviously I was pursuing this in an academic context, getting a PhD in computer science. So, exploring things like different concurrency models and information fault tolerance schemes for, computational things that take weeks instead of minutes to execute.
Okay.
But once I graduated with my PhD, some of these underlying technology, was really looking for ways to commercialize it, and that commercialization effort eventually made its way into Mosaic. And so I think when we started doing that, we reached out to kind of put together the underlying business model of, we felt very strongly that there was a technology enablement to allow a construction company to not necessarily have differentiated margins, because I actually am not sure about that. I think that there's an open hypothesis on that front, but I certainly think that allows you to get to a higher scale than you would otherwise be able to. And I
Okay.
think that was a very compelling narrative arc for a lot of Silicon Valley investors that also see there being a lot of potential in traditional industries and technology to either improve margins or improve scale. And in our case, our focus was, how can we leverage technology to improve the scale of a residential home building operation?
Okay. But what other industries besides construction have you been applying these models to?
I mean, Mosaic is just focused on residential construction.
Okay, but the software and the theory behind better coordinating, yeah, the subs and the supplies is can be in chip manufacturing, computers, all sorts of different industries.
Yeah, certainly. I think I think that the two areas that are probably the most interesting from my mindset is both construction and logistics. There's a bunch of other industries about manufacturing. You
Hmm.
talked about other things specifically like chip manufacturing, things like that. I think as you start going down to some of those more specialized industries, the um, the universal tenets of the coordination elements become less meaningful than the domain specific challenges
Can you
of
give me an example?
yeah, I mean, in getting materials to show up at the right time in a chip plant is a
Hmm.
lot. I mean, it's still an important element, but it has a lot less impact than the lithography machines working properly inside of the chip plant itself, right? And so it makes more sense for you to work on those challenges as opposed to how do you get the trucks to show up on time. And that's what
Okay.
I mean by specialized, more
Okay.
specialized, domain specific problems. Building a home does not have a lithography style challenge, right?
Right.
And so I think things like that are more conducive to these general purpose solutions that the coordination stuff that I've been working on are focused on.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I was thinking of oil and gas, for example, and how there's machinery, yet there's logistics and transport, and there's a bigger market influences from other countries. But a lot of that's sort of out of control anyway. Anyway, so talk about the trip to Arizona.
Yeah, so I actually grew up in Arizona.
Really? Okay, where?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Chandler, Tempe
Okay,
area. Went to Corona del
nice.
Sol for high school.
Okay.
Was
I
not
might
I
we
was not
compete against that high school in marching band. They're
oh,
good.
yeah, right. Yeah, I can't admittedly I can't call myself a native, but I was a couple of months old when my
Oh,
parents moved here, so I consider myself
pretty
an
close.
yeah, exactly.
Okay. And then you were out in Cali for school and other stuff and
Oh,
came
yeah.
back.
So, for early years of Mosaic were more technology, focused on developing the underlying technology, and the data platforms and so on, which, happy to dive into that in a lot more detail. And then when we're looking to go to market and start commercializing the technology, via a operational general contracting business, which was a somewhat unique business model, certainly at the time, um, decided to launch in Phoenix as the launch market. And there was a lot of reasons for that. The major reason was not the fact that I happened to grow up here, although that was a bonus for sure. But it had to do with the fundamentals of the Arizona real estate construction market,
Right.
which speaks for itself.
It's yes, yeah, that's quality job growth.
Yep,
Fundamentally, it's booming. So
100%.
yeah, can you talk us a little bit through what launching that was like and what it's like to try to onboard the different trades with technology and educating them and getting them to adopt it?
Totally. I mean, it's definitely it's a challenge, but it's what I realize is that it's a challenge that you should approach like you'd approach any other startup company. And something I often find myself talking about with other founders, specifically in the technology startup space, is that you need to adopt an experimental hypothesis-driven mindset when you're building a startup company. It's really what you're trying to focus on is you're focusing on finding product market fit. You're trying to find something that you can deliver that other people want. That is the
Mhm.
experimental setup. And what your focus is to run a bunch of experiments to try to figure out what works. And those can be expensive experiments, or they can be cheaper experiments. And you're best to prioritize the cheaper experiments when you're early on, and the more expensive experiments become inevitable as you get to a larger scale. And this never changes, right? Companies like Apple, even today, are arguably conducting experiments, right? They may be conducting
Sure.
larger scale experiments, but it's all about how do you develop something that the market wants to buy? And I think that was the approach. And it's painful, specifically in the construction space, but no more so painful than a pure software as a service company that's selling into the aviation industry, as an example, right?
Okay.
And it's all about just prioritizing your time. You have a finite amount of money that you have for R&D, and you have a finite amount of engineering hours to develop software solutions that deliver value. Focus on delivering value and running a bunch of experiments until you find something that works, and then rinse and repeat it. And I think that was challenging. I think some of the unique elements that we definitely faced in construction, that maybe have less of an issue in other sectors, is the inherent, you know, uh, skepticism that customers, trade partners, and so on have, understandably so. And
Hmm.
I think the way that we solved a lot of those problems as part of these experiments is that we decided, well, we realized that what made their life easier was not having software. And so we try to put a lot of those software stuff internally facing so that we could generate the same reports, Excel files, emails that they were used to seeing.
I see.
And that was actually one of the very early experiments that we conducted and we continue to leverage to this day. Again, that's a moment in time. That's not a universal truth. That
Okay.
example has started to change, and we're starting to be able to
Oh, really?
deliver
Okay.
more technology that way as well. But yeah, I don't think it's the construction technology space is any different than any other technology space, which is it's an experiment around finding product market fit, run a bunch of experiments, and we find out what works, and then don't lose that experimental muscle because you're going to have to continue to do it for the existence of your company.
Right. Right. I imagine there might be a slower adoption in some trades or something, but depending on how tech savvy they are.
Totally. And again, I think that was, where that philosophy that I mentioned earlier came from, right? Which is trying to minimize that third party behavior change,
Mhm.
is embrace it. On one hand, you can view that as a unmovable obstacle, or you can view that as a reality and how do you work around it.
Right.
And I think the way that we approached that was let's assume that is true, that there is going to be skepticism, there's going to be resistance to adoption. That is the case of the world. Let's assume that we're not going to fight it because we're unable to overcome that. What do we
Right.
do? And I think the way that, came obvious to us is, well, we need to do that work that we would want them to do internally, so that they can be more efficient in their businesses. And that eventually got codified as, we saw the repeat
Right.
itself enough experiments that it became codified as a company value of how do we minimize third-party behavior change because we want to make it as easy for a subcontractor to work on our jobs as opposed to any other job.
Right. I've seen it in my experience in some markets. Nashville, for example, there's a couple of companies that really adopted it and their technology in general, and those construction management companies and stuff are just going bonkers because they're so much more efficient. And I think the competitors see that and realize they have to change. There's some old boys in concrete and some other things that they hire other people to do it because they refuse to learn.
But I think that's the deceptive challenge as well, right? And we've seen this play out both within like we have the scar tissue ourselves as a company, and I've certainly seen this play out with many friends of mine that are also in the construction technology space where you're only as strong as your weakest link. And I think
Mhm.
that's why behavior change, and I keep on coming back to this, is such a nefarious problem because it's a viral problem in the construction world. If you have an amazing technology solution that delivers tremendous efficiency across the value chain, but
Right.
one entity, one player is unwilling to adopt it, it it risks crumbling it. And not only do you not gain that efficiency, you may actually become less efficient than you were before. And I think the classic example is, some of the, more modular prefab approaches, right?
Okay.
Where technology legitimately works amazing from a construction speed perspective, from a quality perspective, from a cost perspective. Yeah, you have huge capex, but like assuming that financial engineering works out, the challenge is one subcontractor that you need in the field is unwilling or incapable of adopting to this new methodology. Now everyone else has to compensate for it. And now all of a sudden, what used to be this very hyper efficient, prefabricated, automated construction process is less efficient than traditional methods. And I think
Okay.
that's the nefarious problem in the construction industry is it's such a daisy chain of linking.
Okay. Okay. Putting more cogs in the system, it makes it easy for one stick to stop.
Exactly right. Right. Or another way of saying it is we have a inter trade as opposed to an intra trade challenge.
Okay.
The efficiency is lost not when the framer is on site. The efficiency is lost between the framer and the drywaller, or between
Okay.
the cabinet installer and the tile layer, right? That yes, would it be amazing if the tile got laid down 25% faster? Sure, but that's not where you're losing your time. You're losing your time because the tile guys put stuff in, they did something different. The cabinet guys can't do their work, and now the home
Mhm.
is sitting for 2 weeks. Those
Right.
are some of the challenges that emphasize the daisy chain link in the construction space.
Right. And contractors generally have a hard time saying no to a project. And so is that is your software able to help them navigate their other jobs along with yours?
Yeah, so that's definitely some of the I mentioned some of the features that we're now, starting to,
Okay.
stat in terms of new technology. And yes, the idea there is that we're looking for a lot of the technology that we've been developing on Mosaic to not just help our subcontractors on our jobs, but other jobs
Okay.
as well. Opt in, going back to the idea of minimizing third-party behavior change. If they are not interested in adopting it, or thank you very much, they think they have it under control, they probably do, and that's fantastic, right? But that's actually some of the stuff that we're actually excited to be. We will be announcing some new offerings and some new products later this year.
Okay.
Not just initially on Mosaic jobs for our subcontractors, but eventually to non-Mosaic jobs as well, which is going to be really exciting for us.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. Let's talk a little bit about the Mosaic jobs. What was sort of your first project? How many have you done? Where are you at now?
Yeah, totally. So we actually first got started doing for sale construction. Got
Okay.
started in the Phoenix area. We also then built a lot of homes up in northern Arizona as
Hmm.
well. And then from there, kind of piggybacking that to eventually getting involved in the built to rent space, and the built to rent market now represents probably over 90% of our revenues. And so we
Okay.
definitely found a very strong degree of product market fit within that segment.
Are
Um,
you building to sell or building to hold?
so our client, so we're the GC, so our
Mhm.
developer clients run the gamut. There are the merchant builders out there that are, buying, stabilizing, and flipping. And we also have some clients that are going to hold it for the next 30 years, right? And so it definitely runs the gamut in that regard. There's more of the merchant builders out there in terms that represent our client base. I don't know, I can't say if that is indicative or reflective of the broader market overall. But there is definitely a bias in that sense. Um, and yeah, we've, late last year, we're obviously still a younger company, but, celebrated our 1000th delivery in the second half of last year, which was a good
Nice.
milestone for us. But, true to the geometric growth of the company, we'll probably do, 1300 closings this year alone
Okay.
as a company. And so we're excited about the growth that we've experienced as a business, and looking to
Nice.
find ways to continue to grow in subsequent years, albeit with interesting market conditions for sure.
Sure. Sure. So, uh, wow. Okay. I want to have a few different ways I could go right now. Let's just talk about Mosaic's bigger goals right now for
Yeah, I mean,
2025, maybe, or in the 5, 10 year space.
totally. Well, I mean, I think the overarching, you know, well, let me whatever, like go up and be in the rainbows and unicorns
Sure.
for a bit, kind of, big vision, so to speak, for Mosaic as a company. So I apologize if I am too lofty in my descriptions, right? But really, Mosaic from the start has, notwithstanding the very strong technology orientation of the company, notwithstanding the very hyper operational, hardcore operational tendencies of us as a company, we were very mission oriented as a business. And our mission statement has always been and will continue to be, how do we create places that people love, and how do we make
Okay.
the places widely available? And one of the core elements that we have found in terms of us being that general contractor is that we think that the best way for us to create these vibrant places is to support thoughtful developers. And we wanted to be, and the biggest challenge that they have is construction. I mean, there's many challenges, but construction is, if not the top, certainly one of the top challenges that they have. And we want to be that paintbrush. We want to be that new tool that they have, that they're able to paint on the canvas to deliver the vibrant projects that they envision, that they know the local markets need, that they're the ones that have their finger on the pulse of their local communities. They're the ones that have the wherewithal of being able to get certain things done from a financing perspective, from an entitlements perspective. And so our entire focus is, how do we empower thoughtful developers in pursuit of this, albeit lofty, mission statement.
Right.
And that has been the case from the beginning. Our focus on the trades and the subcontractors has been in pursuit of that. We felt the best way that we could serve our, these thoughtful developers is for us to partner with thoughtful subcontractors. That's what we've been focusing on in that regard. And I think that will continue to be the case. And, we're likely going to be exploring other ways in which we can better serve our developer customers beyond just the current scope of work that we have as general contractors, and helping them build their deals. We're starting to explore ways in which we can help them put together deals that they would otherwise not be able to do. Maybe taking on some of the development scope to assist them in their pursuits. But long story, big picture, we want to empower the next generation of thoughtful developers in the United States, and we want to be their builder.
Okay. Excellent. I like it. So, how many projects do you have going on right now, and how are you planning on scaling your capacity?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, right now we have about over about 2,000 units under active construction. That's about
Okay.
across about a dozen or so projects.
And
Uh,
90% of those are build to rent.
90% of those are built to rent units. And so what was the other question you asked?
Well, how you're planning on scaling that, but
Yeah. Totally.
Go
I
ahead.
mean, yeah, I think in terms of, the scaling, I think there's two different elements in that regard. The first one is just natural geographic expansion. So that's one area of growth. The second one is for us to continue to double down the markets that we're in. So I think geographic and market expansion is one definite key area. The other thing that we're spending a lot of time on as well right now is, and I kind of alluded to the maybe strange market forces and market dynamics that
Mhm.
are that exist today, um, is that not just with build to rent, but a lot of real estate projects are hard to pencil right now.
Mhm.
There's a tremendous amount of demand for not affordable housing, but housing that is within a
Yeah,
certain
workforce housing,
rental.
right? Yeah,
Yeah,
not luxury, but yeah,
there's a certain monthly rent at which there is almost infinite demand. And the core challenge that we've seen, not just across our portfolio of customers and their projects, is that current development costs make it very difficult to hit those monthly rent numbers.
right.
Cost of land, cost of capital, cost of construction, right? And so one of the things that we have found that we've had success in, even in the past couple of months or so, is we found ourselves in a situation where we've been opportunistically able to connect the dots just by our cross-sectional exposure to those different players, right? To find ways in which we could get deals to come together that otherwise would not. And I think that is a fascinating element that we're definitely looking into as a business. If there's ways in which we're able to be a deal generator as opposed to just a deal builder,
Right.
to try to put together deals in a repeatable motion. And it's unclear if there is a way to do that, right? But that's definitely something that we're intrigued at trying to do.
Sure.
Obviously, in support of our clients and our customers, but also as a business for ourselves, it will be a tremendous growth factor if we are able to find a repeatable motion in that vein, especially over the next, I'll call it 1 to 2 years, where there's potential
Okay.
uncertain market conditions.
Okay. I know on the projects I'm a part of, I like to see that the builder has skin in the game,
Mhm.
right? That and so it's a nice partner to what sort of what are some of the biggest challenges you've had to overcome in your career, Salman?
I mean, I think probably I mean, there's two ways of thinking about that. One is like more technical operational challenges, but
Okay.
then the other one is more of the not to come across as too vulnerable, but the kind of internal head talk from an entrepreneurial perspective.
Sure.
I
It's
think
it's
is
it's lonely, right? As an
it,
entrepreneur.
it very much is, and I actually think that that is an area where um, most of the difficult challenges to overcome actually lie in. But
Okay.
specifically on like some of the business elements, I think some of the biggest challenges typically fall within a category or a bucket of how do you admit that a certain approach that you are taking is not going to work? And how do you galvanize the partners, the supporters, the employees towards a shift midstream? Those are typically some of the most challenging problems to solve. There's a whole long litany of things that I can describe in terms of technological, like, data problems that were interesting that we figured out, right? There's a lot
Okay.
of, operational construction type, issues that I think we have become very, very good at, right? But some of the biggest ones are that, hey, we're trying something and admitting it's not working and focusing on something else. Um, I mean, I think that is the most difficult, but it's necessary. And being able to pivot and adapt to market and changing conditions has definitely been. Um, I'm not sure if Mosaic would be around today if it wasn't for some of those changes, and that goes into that internal emotional management side of things as
Right.
well. And not everybody has this, but you mentioned it can be very lonely, right? Being from an entrepreneurial perspective, whether you're running a high growth tech startup company or, your own internal, lifestyle business. It's incredibly important to be able to make sure that you're thinking straight, and you're
Right.
able to have a release valve of yourself because um, there's this interesting dynamic where everybody wants to be the boss until you are the boss, and then you just want somebody else to be the boss at that point.
Right. Right.
Being prepared for that is definitely its own challenge, and I don't know if I'm a valid authority to speak on that subject matter, but it is from my perspective and many of the friends
Okay.
that I have something that definitely comes up a lot in conversation.
Right. Do you have a board of directors that you get to regularly bounce things off of?
Yeah, we do. So Mosaic's a tech backed by a lot of technology venture capitals from primarily the tech sector in the Bay Area. So our largest investors, Andreessen Horowitz, and we have a pretty tight knit board as a company as well. And I don't know what I did in a prior life or whatever to deserve the incredibly supportive and thoughtful and intelligent and wise board that I have, but I of all the challenges that Mosaic has had, weird board dynamics and control challenges and things like that have definitely not been one of them. It's been a very aligned experience and incredibly drama-free, which I am incredibly grateful for.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Great to hear it. Well, it sounds like things are going well for you and Mosaic. Um, to keep the prosperity moving forward, do you invest in the same products that you build, or I mean, in the sense, I mean, separate from putting everything back into the company?
Yeah. So, are you talking about like does Mosaic participate in the deals, or are you talking about something?
Both, really. I'm curious of both, but I was thinking, talking about you, right? As a company owner, usually uh, that's their baby, and their most of their attention and finances are in
Yeah.
pursuing and growing their company. But are you at the point where you're diversifying, and if so, in the types of products you build?
Admittedly, I'm probably not a great role model in that regard in terms of diversification and
Sure.
whatnot. No, I think right now, in terms of where I'm at a personal level, yes, it's all going back into the business. So
Okay.
I'm fully exposed in that regard, and continuing to double down on
Yeah.
the business on that front. But yes, I do think that it feels nice to be operating in an industry that you yourself would park your money as well.
Right.
I definitely feel that way about real estate and obviously the built to rent segment more broadly. Right now, I feel the best way for me to have exposure to that segment is to continue to double down and reinvest in the business that I founded. So that's what I'm doing. And
Right.
at some point, the capital needs for growth of the business are going to be less. And I'm looking forward to that point in time, and B,
Yeah. Right.
I am looking forward to staying invested in this industry and segment more broadly.
Okay. Excellent. All right. Well, as we sort of wrap up the interview, was there any bigger projects in particular that you're excited about coming up in 25?
Yeah, no, I think we are excited to be launching some of these new technology offerings that I
Okay.
mentioned a little bit earlier as well. So that's going to be a really exciting moment for us as a company. So please stay tuned for some more announcements and news in that regard. And yeah, I also think there's a broader interesting macro project of there's a huge demand for housing, and there are
Yep.
very weird market dynamics and a lot of market uncertainty. And navigating those dynamics are going to be fascinating. We're certainly trying to figure out what we can do as in our position as a general contractor to help both ourselves and others navigate that. But I think that's going to be a fascinating story arc for 25 and beyond.
Right. Okay. Okay. I wanted to I could get into the Phoenix market, right? The pipeline things coming and the starts that are down and so forth. And but suffice it to say that it's a good time to be building that product here in Phoenix for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely, and not just it's a good business, but it's good for the state. It's good for the economy.
Oh,
These are
sure.
it's you know notwithstanding the fact that yes, we all have our own selfish economic financial interests in these projects.
Right.
The reality is that it is something that we as a society need.
Yes.
Notwithstanding all the other stuff, that does help, at least me going to bed at night, is that you are working on a meaningful problem
Right.
that is sorely needed.
Right. Yeah, we had a an investor dinner last winter in Scottsdale with the mayor of Phoenix, Kate Gallego, just supporting the build to rent space and just how valuable it is to have the same this a 3 bedroom, 2.5 bath, 2 car garage townhome is $1,000 a month cheaper to rent than to try to buy your own right now in
Yep.
Phoenix. So the affordability gap in a lot of major markets, including Phoenix, is pretty significant and very challenging.
Yep. Absolutely.
So they're embracing it for sure. All right. Well, if Salman, if people would like to connect with you and reach out or learn more about Mosaic, what should they do?
Yeah, you can find our website. It's mosaic.us, and you can also find the company as well as myself on LinkedIn as well.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you sharing your story and insights into success and developing here in Phoenix. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tim. It was great to be on.
Inspired by our guests? Visit phoenixprosperitypodcast.com/guest and join us on the show and share your success story with Tim. The spotlight awaits.